Hey, what's up guys? So today we're going to be talking about The Amazing Spider-Man number 25. I will be outright talking about the comic book itself, so spoiler warning, if you haven't read the story and you want to know what happens before you hear me talk about it, then probably click away right now. Otherwise, if you don't mind following the story through my videos, then you're also welcome to do so. But without further ado, let's begin. So this entire comic is going to tell the story from MJ's perspective when she's been stuck in the other dimension this entire time. The story begins right as Spider-Man and the god Way Up get teleported back to MJ's and Spider-Man's original dimension, leaving MJ behind with Paul. They're both left alone in the room after the portal closes, and they're left in silence when MJ finally speaks up and just says, "Peter." Paul tells her that he's gone. You did the right thing. She questions Paul. What do we do now? And then we cut to elsewhere, where Raven's freaking out, acknowledging the fact that Way Up has dropped. And he's saying to himself, his essence hunts the dark road. Quickly, may I be reborn, the vessel of death. May I bind Way Up's sacrifice to me. May the Scarlet Woman accept her chains, and may her death make me a god. And he's seen just drawing symbols on the ground. We cut to a day later, and MJ's still waiting for Spider-Man in that same exact spot. Paul walks up to her and says, "What did I tell you? We're moving." MJ says, "I'm not going anywhere. Peter's coming back." And Paul says, "There's an 8-foot hole in the roof, and the emissary knows we're here. Peter's gone. If you want to survive, you have to." MJ's not listening to this and just smacks the hell out of Paul and tells him to shut up. She begins crying and continues telling Paul, "You don't know Peter. He's coming back for me. You can leave me if you want to. I'm not going anywhere. Don't touch me again." MJ gets on her knees and picks up a piece of Spider-Man's costume and just sits there in silence looking at it. And Paul is just sort of standing there. Inevitably, Paul does pick up his glasses and starts walking away and saying, "I'll grab some mortar glyphs. I have to patch that hole." Now we cut to 1 month later. MJ's walking in on Paul while he's working on some weird glyph computer whiz from that universe magic. And she's holding like some sort of weapon from that universe. I'm assuming Paul probably made it for her, or is just using one of Paul's weapons. Anyways, MJ walks in and says, "Just a few glyphoids, trying the perimeter fence. I ran them off." Paul acknowledges and says, "Copy that, thank you." And MJ's wondering, "What are you working on?" Paul continues with his work and says, "You've seen what symbols can do in this world. I'm building a device to randomly combine them. I could stumble upon a combination that unleashes an incredible amount of power." MJ looks at one of the symbols and it just so happens to look like a 7, right? And so she says, "The jackpot." Paul's like, "What?" And MJ continues, "It's like a slot machine. That symbol could almost be a 7. Made me think of hitting the jackpot." Paul turns around to look at her as she's walking out, and you can see he's just thinking to himself about the symbol that looks like a 7. We cut to 3 months later. We see Raven's freaking out and saying, "You are the Scarlet Woman. Do not deny your role. I will return when you accept your bindings." And he looks like he's just running away from this silhouette figure. And it's revealed to be like this super badass, battle-born MJ. And Paul standing right behind her with the wound. MJ asks him, "He get you?" Paul says, "Yeah, shoulder, not too deep." "You?" She says, "Leg, same." Paul makes a few observations to her and says, "He knows we're alive. Knows we killed his god. Knows where we live." And she confirms with them and says, "You're right. We can't stay here." At this point, she acknowledges she can't wait for Peter any longer to come back. They gotta find a safe area to go to. And we cut to a week later, and we see Paul and MJ just walking through this rainy city, trying to avoid all the monsters that are around. MJ turns back and says to herself, "What's the holdup, Tiger?" wondering when Peter's gonna come back. After a moment of pondering, she does turn back to Paul and just continues following him. 3 months later, and it looks like they're just in a snowy environment. And it looks like they found a little cabin, and they're just scavenging it for materials. When all of a sudden they hear a crash noise, and they go to investigate the cabin, and they open one of the doors, and they're just pointing their guns as they slowly creep inside. They break another door that leads into another room, and they discover a couple of kids. And it's the very kids from the previous issues that we haven't got to know anything about, or where they came from. And it looks like they just happen to be in this cabin. The boy says, "Do you know the Scribble Man?" MJ and Paul just look at each other. We cut to another week later, and it looks like they set up a little camp for the night. The boy's struggling to fall asleep, and he's just freaking out about the Scribble Man, and it looks like the boy's sister is just trying to calm him down while MJ just sits there waiting for them to fall asleep before she walks out of the tent to accompany Paul by the campfire. Paul hands her a hot cup of joe and questions, "You get him down?" MJ says, "They're down, but I didn't have anything to do with it." Paul is sketching in his notepad, and it looks like he's working on a new lab design. But he says, "They've seen things. Both of them." MJ says, "Figure they have. I'm sure their parents didn't just walk off." Paul says, "Nope, there's no telling what they ran into out here. Mary Jane, our plan isn't set up to care for 2 children. It makes everything harder. Hiding, food. We have to be realistic." MJ gets pissed off at hearing this and says, "I'm not leaving them, Paul. If they're too much trouble for you, you can go." Paul gets a little shocked and says, "What? I wasn't saying that. I would never say that." MJ is left in silence for a moment and then says, I know you wouldn't." Paul takes a sip of his hot cocoa and says, okay then. And it's just left pretty awkward there. We cut to a month later, and it looks like Paul's working on something in the background, while the kids are just eating their food. MJ walks up to the boy and says, "Owen, can you eat some food for me, please?" Hands him a bowl of food, and she questions, "You hear me, buddy?" Looks like he's not responding, but inevitably he does respond and says, "The Scribble Man doesn't come anymore. Is that because of you?" MJ tells him, Yes, of course. I won't let anyone hurt you." The boy stands in silence and then finally responds to MJ by saying, "You can hug me sometimes if you want." And it looks like there's tears in MJ's eyes and goes to hug the boy while Paul watches in the background. Now we cut to 3 months later, and it looks like Paul's super buff as fuck, and he's fitting MJ with some sort of technology. And he says, "I know it's crazy, but using the symbols of luck and chance you suggested made all the difference. You're right, I may have hit the jackpot." MJ responds with, "Ha, I wouldn't be so sure about that. You gonna fire it up?" Paul says, "Yup, just let me adjust the wrist control." And as he's working on the little gadget on her wrist, it pops off, and the gadget falls. And they both reach at the same time to grab it. And then, what do you know, they're both holding each other's hands. They look at each other, and Paul says, "Mary Jane, and they're just left in silence, looking at each other. Days go by, and it looks like they have a little small family. Months go by. Paul is fucking shredded, and it looks like they're even a closer family together. MJ grows really attached to the kids. Winters go by, and Paul's just sitting in a room, and it looks like it's very awkward between MJ and him, and all he says is, "I should have told you." Summers go by, and it looks like they've fully established a little farm for themselves. The kids are just playing, Paul's just peeling a potato, and MJ's just watering plants. The very next panel is just Paul and MJ just looking at each other, and it looks like they're laying down, and this panel is basically where they tell us, dude, they freaking smashed. So it's fully established by now that they have a clear family connection. MJ occasionally saves them from little monsters that appear at their house, but their house is full of protection and glyphics that Paul sets up, all Doctor Strange style, so they can actually live in comfort. One random day when they're all enjoying everyone's company, MJ says, "I'll go check on the pasta." Paul says, "You hear that? It's time to eat." Kids are just excited, denying that they want to eat, but clearly they're excited. Owen looks like he's just standing by the doorway, and in the background Paul's asking Owen, "You coming to the dinner?" But Owen's just standing there and says, "What does the Scribble Man want?" MJ's in the kitchen and hears this and says, "Huh? You haven't talked about him in a long time. Are you scared of him again?" And he responds with, "Yeah," and it looks like there's a shadow that creeps over him. Owen says, "I don't like how he's looking at me." MJ hears this and says, "What?" And she hears the Scribble Man say, "The Sunblood returns for you, but it is too late. The Scarlet Woman is bound. She will feed the blade of decay." Raven's just showing his blade to her. MJ grabs the hot pasta and tosses it at Raven, while yelling at the same time to Paul to get the kids to the safe room. The pasta unfortunately doesn't hit Raven because he's pulling up a little force field. Paul sets the kids in the safe room and tells them to stay there, while MJ is just trying to distract Raven somehow. But Raven says, "You sent the Sunblood away, but his importance died with Waya. There's only you, Scarlet Woman. You are the final sacrifice." MJ's like, huh? Which also leaves me personally confused, because I'm like, what the fuck is up with all this sacrifice shit? Who's actually worth the sacrifice here? I feel like they're changing the rules on who we're sacrificing. But anyways, Paul forcibly tackles Raven while yelling, get away from her. And as they're falling, Raven says, you defile my ceremony. Oh dear, careful old friend. Paul is just left on the ground while Raven actually gets up. But Raven hears a voice from behind him saying, I've got bad news for you, jerk. And it's revealed to be MJ, who's wearing some technology. And it's the technology that looks like they were working on earlier. But MJ says, you're about to hit the jackpot, and activates it while pointing it at Raven. But it sort of fizzles and it fumbles, and she's looking at it like, huh? It looks like it just breaks, and Raven just finds this super hilarious, and he's just laughing his ass off saying, did you build that? You must be terrible at math. Paul is on the ground holding his stomach, and he tells him, no, it's just getting warmed up. MJ's crazy power looks like it's just a slot machine with the symbols of ice cream, a bag of cash, and cotton candy. And she's ready. She's like, all right then. Aims it at Raven and pulls her trigger, only to find out that Raven's just covered in cotton candy. And he's like, what the fuck is this? Cotton candy? MJ looks at her wrists and questions, is it? But Raven closes in and grabs her by the neck and says, your life offends me, as it denies me godhood, and just tosses her across the room. This was a clear moment for him to literally just off her, but tosses her across the room. I'm assuming that's probably the overpowered final boss who just thinks he's too powerful, so he just sort of plays with his food, probably. Or this is just to kill a little bit more time before Spider-Man shows up. But anyways, she gets flung across the room, and she's rubbing her head while wondering, cotton candy? And Paul confirms her, it's based on chance, trade-offs, for everything, talking about the piece of technology that she's using. But after recovering, MJ looks determined and says, I'll try again. Paul goes, wait, I didn't tell you. If you get 3 skulls, Paul unfortunately gets cut off because this sounds like pretty useful information. And Raven's just standing over them, saying, quiet now. Let me make your death a sacred thing. I will plunge the blade of decay into your heart, and I will become way up. MJ now cuts him off and says, try it, mother. And then MJ gets cut off, and that's when the portal starts opening up behind Raven, revealing it to be Spider-Man, coming back for MJ. But MJ's thinking to herself, as this is happening, and then there was a bright light, and suddenly you were there. You were saving me just like you used to, like no time had passed. But it had. But something about your arrival gave Paul the time he needed to end our nightmare. Or just to make a quick correction, she's not thinking this, she's actually telling someone this, but we get to it in a moment. But anyways, I did bring up in the previous few issues when this is actually happening, and I think I said that Raven shanked himself, because that's what it looked like to me, but this comic is actually saying that Paul snuck up behind him using Raven's own blade to off him, while Raven's distracted with Spider-Man. But anyways, it does continue the recap as the kids get introduced with Paul as MJ's family to Peter. We're in a hospital, and it's revealed that MJ's actually just talking to Peter. And she finishes by saying, you brought us all home, saved us. But, well, I guess you know the rest. Peter looks over at her and questions, how long was I gone? She says, years. Almost 4. I thought I'd never see you again, Peter. Peter's wondering, and you and Paul? MJ affirms, yes, me and Paul and Rami, and Owen. I don't know how you pronounce that, Rami, whatever the fuck. But they're left just sitting in silence. Finally, Peter does break the silence, though, and says, I never stopped the second I came back. I never stopped until... MJ cuts him off and says, I know, Peter. Thank you. Peter continues saying, we took a walk a month ago. We were going to move in together, and you asked me, and I said I was a mess. MJ finishes his sentence by saying, when aren't you a mess? Peter's just looking down silently, while MJ affirms to him, I'm sorry, Peter. I'm not leaving him. Peter is shown walking out of the hospital by himself, just making a very upset face, while MJ is just left in the hospital talking to a doctor. The doctor says his liver got nicked, but he should make a full recovery, referring to Paul. MJ tells him, thank you, doctor. The doctor tells her, we do need a little help IDing him. We can't find any records for, and as it is with this entire comic so far. The doctor also gets cut off by a voice out of frame saying, "Mary Jane?" They both look behind MJ, and the doctor's shocked and says, "Wow." The voice behind her continues saying, "I was hoping you can clear a few things up," and it's left kind of in a mystery for a few pages. We come back to Peter, who's walking back pretty upset when he hears a voice out of frame questioning Peter. He sort of side-eyes the voice while it continues, "I think you have something that belongs to us." And it's revealed to be the Fantastic Four. Ben Grimm says it looked something like a mini fusion reactor. Ring any bells? Johnny Storm is still on fire, floating above him saying, "And then maybe you can give us an explanation. I think you owe us that too." Reed Richards and Sue Storm are just standing there, looking menacingly. Peter kind of looks like he's giving attitude, and he says, "The reactor's fried. I used it to bring Mary Jane back. That's all I'm gonna say about that." Johnny flies over to Peter questioning, "What is wrong with you, man? You break into our place, steal our stuff, and you don't want to give an explanation? You think now that your girlfriend's back, you'd be in a better..." Peter's not hearing this, and yells, "Shut up," while simultaneously punching the torch in the jaw, catching Peter's hand on fire, instantly pulling it away after the punch. Ben Grimm sees his homie get punched and says, "I've had enough of this jerk," and goes in to punch Peter in the face. But Peter's pretty agile, countering attacking his move. Eventually, Mr. Fantastic wraps Peter around, confining him in the air, and Reed's just trying to get to Peter by saying, "Peter, please, we just want to help you." And Peter's acting like the most douchebag dude ever here. He's just yelling at him like, "Put me down, I said put me down," and goes in for a punch, but it gets blocked by Sue Storm's invisible barrier that she makes. And she's asking Peter, how about we stop punching things before they start punching back? Peter's just full of rage, and he says, "That's the thing, Sue. The day I've had, I want someone to hit me back." A voice out of frame just says, "Well then, flame on." But a hand out of frame reaches for his shirt and just pushes him on the ground, saying, "That's enough." And it's revealed to be Captain America, telling the Fantastic Four to let him go. Cap tells Peter, "I talked to MJ Parker. I understand why you did what you did, but you could have done it a whole lot gentler. We would have helped." Peter states, "But not fast enough. I wasn't fast enough either. Just go, please." The Cap looks over at the Fantastic Four and tells them, "We're leaving." The Torch is looking pretty upset and says, "What? We're just going to let him?" But he gets cut off by Captain America and says, "He was in a bind, still is. We gotta trust him to see his way out of it, however long it takes." They all just walk away, leaving Peter on the ground, to himself and his thoughts. Now we get a voice from Rabin, the Scribble Man, saying, "To find a new way, one must give up the old. There is a price, of course, the weight of which may crush you. There is screaming violence, the rending of cloth and flesh, and then the silence of acceptance. I have traveled the black road and returned with wisdom. It was I who failed way up. I was the symbol of the ceremony's failure. To complete it, I had to oof. And now the power of the great way up infuses me, begging to be a god once more. I have only to claim it with sacrifice. The ceremony must be finished. The Scarlet Woman must oof. To be continued." And that's how that story ends. So what do I think about the comic book itself? Well, I definitely enjoyed it. I knew this one was going to focus more on MJ's perspective in the other dimension, and that was something I was kind of looking forward to finding more about. This issue definitely delivered with that. I like seeing over the passage of time her slowly losing hope over Peter actually showing up, because of course it's taking forever. Time just moves a lot faster in this universe than it does where Peter's actually hanging out. And throughout that entire time going by, she's also adapting to that world and just getting more badass. And the thing about the kids that they end up encountering, I honestly thought it was gonna be MJ's and Paul's like blood related kids, but no, it's just these random ass kids that just find in the cabin. Who knows where they came from or what their origin story is, but this is basically another mystery that gets brought up at the same exact time that a question gets answered, you know, on where the kids came from. If they didn't come out of MJ's vagina, where the fuck they come from? I like the little story element about Paul sort of thinking of leaving the kids behind, sort of thinking like, dude, we gotta leave the kids behind, otherwise it's gonna be a pain in the ass to survive. And he does bring that point up to MJ, but she shuts him down, saying like, if you want to go by yourself, you better go. I'm not doing that. But like I said, he does start out like that. But as more time goes by, he also gets attached to the children as if he were a dad to them. Now, out of the two, Owen looks like he seriously has gone through some crazy stuff. It looks like he experienced some form of trauma, but they don't explain what that trauma is. But MJ is there to comfort him whenever he feels horrible about it. I mean, the trauma does have something to do with the Scribble Man, but, you know, what it actually is, who the fuck knows? There's quite a few different art styles in this comic, too. And it's very obvious. They last like a few pages, and then it just changes. One moment, Paul's just looking like Paul, and then the next moment, he's super ripped. I guess with the passage of time, he gets incredibly jacked, and the art style just changes in that universe. And with the passage of time, it's confirmed in this issue, MJ bangs Paul. And something that got me thinking too as I'm reading this story. So it does get explained that, you know, Peter didn't have time to mess around with anything that would take long to get back to MJ, you know. That's why he did what he did. He sped run being an asshole and getting back to MJ. And by doing so, he did just show up on time to save both MJ and Paul and the kids. So just the way this story is written, if he had gone and done and sought help from like any other superhero that would have taken any longer, MJ and Paul and the kids probably would have been oofed, you know? So Spider-Man in this case did definitely try his very best to save MJ as fast as possible by being an asshole, and just narrowly saves Paul and MJ. Or actually just shows up to distract Raven, enough for Paul to show up and impel the Scribble Man. A little thought with the power device that MJ has that just summons like a random slot machine and just does a random powerful or non-powerful thing. I really thought we were about to get some like crazy action with that, but the man's just got covered in cotton candy. I guess that's very well in tone of a slot machine. You're gonna get disappointed, or you might get some good shit. In this case, we got disappointed. Funny little power that she has there. As far as how the story ends, I don't even know what to think of it, honestly. With the Fantastic Four and Captain America just leaving Peter there to just wallow in self-pity. I don't know, man, that's whack. And then, after Spider-Man does all that, the Scribble Man shows up and he's like, we just got one last step for this ceremony that we're trying to do here. So not only is Peter like on his lowest low, the Scribble Man returns and he's about to oof someone. It is certain in the next issue that someone's gonna get oofed, because that's what they keep teasing here with the cover for the next issue. As far as who does get oofed, my money's definitely on MJ. They're gonna offer. Right after Spider-Man literally tries his best to speedrun and get MJ back, they literally offer. Oh man, at his lowest point. If he wasn't already at this lowest point, he's definitely like, scraping the bottom of the barrel there. But like I said, I definitely enjoyed the comic because it actually felt like a coherent story where all the characters felt like characters. I appreciate you guys listening to me talk about this comic book, and if you enjoyed it, just make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.